Today I'm going to be making a maple stout bread. I got the recipe off of a blog created by a woman named Rachel Howden. I've pretty much been working my way through all of her quick sweet breads. They're delicious 9x5 loaves of bread that are sweet and quick to make. This one is a maple stout, so you're going to need a stout beer. A stout of any type. If you have a preference, a kind of stout beer you like, use that. This is left-hand milk stout, which I've heard good things about. I've never had it, so I'll try a little bit before I mix it in. You're also going to need to set out 6 tablespoons of butter and let that soften. And of course you're going to need a 9x5 loaf pan. So if you want a delicious maple stout bread, make one with me. You're also going to want to get out 2 eggs and let those come to room temperature. Here's a tip for you. Anytime you're baking and the recipe calls for eggs, they mean large eggs, because you can see medium or extra large or jumbo at the grocery. When baking, large eggs. So set them out, let them come to room temperature. You need to preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Now in a large bowl, we need 1 3/4 cups of flour. 1, 1/2, and then there's 1/4. 1 3/4 cups flour. You need 1 teaspoon of baking soda. So 1 teaspoon baking soda. You need 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. 1/2 teaspoon baking powder. You need 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So there's 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Stir these well together with a whisk. You just want these to combine pretty well. There's really not much to it, it's mostly just flour. Now in your high-speed mixer, your stand mixer, we need 3/4 cup of packed dark brown sugar. Most recipes use a light brown sugar. This calls for a dark brown sugar. I think that dark brown sugar really goes well with the stout. Gives it kind of like a molasses type flavor, a stout flavor. They go well together. If you prefer just light brown sugar, use that. But you have to make sure you pack your sugar. So there's 1/2 cup packed, and if you packed it well enough, it comes out in a clump. And here's 1/4 cup packed brown sugar. So in total, you need 3/4 cup of packed brown sugar, and they'll stay together in clumps quite nicely, if you packed it well enough. If it falls apart, you didn't pack it well enough. Put more in there. Now to this, we need to add our 6 tablespoons of softened butter. So the butter you had sitting out softening. Then you're going to want to beat those together until well mixed. Start slow. And work your way up to a high speed. You'll see them kind of come together in one giant clump of brown sugar and buttery goodness. That's when you know you beat them together well enough. Now we need to beat in our eggs. 1 at a time, starting slow, working your way up in speed. One good piece of advice is break your eggs into a separate container. That way you can be sure that there's no shells getting into your mixture. So start slow and add your eggs 1 at a time. Add your second egg. Now we can beat them well. Now we need to add half a teaspoon of vanilla extract and beat that in. So there we go. It's half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now beat it in. In a smaller mixing bowl, put a half a cup of your stout beer. And you can use a liquid measure cup for this, but dry measure works the same. Alright, that's a half cup of stout. I tried the stout we're using and it's not bad. I'm not the biggest fan of stouts, but it's a pretty high quality stout. So if you like to drink a certain type of stout beer, use what you like. I mean, that's going to make the bread kind of taste like your beer a little bit, so if you like the stout, chances are you're going to love the bread. But you also need a half cup of sour cream. And kind of like with brown sugar, you got to pack it into your container, your measuring cup. So just like brown sugar, we got to pack in our sour cream into our measuring cup. So I packed it like so. And gently put that in with your beer. Don't splash it down. I've splashed before and gotten really messy, so be careful. You need a 1/4 cup of maple syrup. So earlier I said the dark brown sugar kind of has a molasses-like taste to it. Well, molasses is very similar to maple syrup, just with a darker flavor. So we're adding syrup here. So all these are going to combine to kind of do a very dark, sweet bread with kind of a stouty, sugary background. Now we need to whisk these together until well combined. Start slow because you don't want to splash everywhere. And we're using a whisk because we really want this to become one whole solution. I'd say that's good enough. You'll notice too, we have a container of dry ingredients and a container of wet ingredients. This is super common in baking. I've noticed it a lot with breads and items like that. We're going to alternatively add the dry mix and the wet mix to our butter mixture. So pour a little dry in, beat it. Pour a little wet in, beat it. This is a very common way of mixing things in baking. Now, like I mentioned before, we have to mix in our dry ingredients and wet ingredients alternatively, so one at a time, alternating, into our butter mixture. Butter and egg mixture. So I'm going to mix in a little bit of this. And just keep it at a low speed. We're not trying to really beat these together fast, unlike our butter and sugar, which we were. These we're just going to be nice and steady with. And we're only beating these just until they're combined. So don't overmix. So I'm going to pour in a little bit of my wet mixture too. Start slow. And slowly pour your dry in again. Now finish out your wet ingredients. I would say those are just combined. You can grab an icing spatula and kind of move it around yourself to make sure everything's combined. And I saw a little bit of brown sugar on the bottom. So I'm going to make sure I get that up, kind of fold it up to the top, and maybe mix a little longer, but not much longer. So we've got our well-greased 9x5 baking dish. Gently spoon your batter into it. Make sure it kind of evenly spreads. And use your icing spatula to get out all of your batter. Once you get all the batter into the 9x5, I like to hit it just a little bit just to even things out. It's only going to fill about half the container. But now we can get it into our oven at 350 and cook it for 45 minutes. So we've got our oven at 350 degrees. We've got our batter in our 9x5 baking dish. Put it in the center rack of your oven and bake it for 45 minutes, or until you can put a toothpick in the center and it comes out dry. So there's crumbs on it, not batter. Alright, it's been about 42 minutes and the loaf is done. So open your oven and take it out. Oh yeah, that looks good. It's a nice golden brown. Now get this onto a wire rack to cool. Let it cool in the pan on a wire rack for 10 minutes. Then dump it out and let it cool to room temperature completely. Now we can make the maple glaze. You're going to need 5 tablespoons of powdered sugar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 tablespoons of powdered sugar. So it seems like this is going to be super thick, or not even mixed completely, but it really will. So there we go. 1 tablespoon of maple syrup. Now you just whisk them all together. You may actually need more than a tablespoon of maple syrup. So I'm going to do a little bit more. And whisk it together until it's nice and smooth and easy to glaze over our bread. So I let my bread cool for over an hour. Now I'm going to cut it with a bread knife. And usually I cut my breads. I have a bad habit of cutting my breads when they're still warm, which makes them harder to cut with a bread knife. Once they're nice and cool, you can really cut into them easily. Oh yeah, and this is cutting great. I'm not crushing the bread, and it's not sending crumbs everywhere. I'm cutting all mine a little thin. Oh yeah, that looks beautiful. So now using a spoon, I'm just going to spread the glaze over my bread. And if you want, you can microwave your glaze, or if you have a brush, that would work really well too. Like a pastry brush. Now, let's try a piece. I got that one that kind of fell off on the end. Put some extra glaze on it. Let's see how good it is. Oh yeah, that's good. To me, this tastes like a really good breakfast bread. It's got that kind of rich, darker, brown sugar, mapley flavor to it. The stout, I can tell the stout's in it a little bit too. It gives it a kind of a nice base. This bread would go perfect, I think, with some eggs and bacon. This is delicious, great maple stout bread. That was easy to make. If you want a loaf, try it.